talk a little bit about 28 Years Later. It is the much anticipated sequel to 28 Days Later, which, of course, is a seminal work in early 2000s horror. And the original director, Danny Boyle, is returning, along with the original writer, Alex Garland. I happen to be a pretty big fan of both of these gentlemen, and my expectations were pretty darn high for this film. As many of you may know, there already was a sequel to the original 28 Days Later called 28 Weeks Later that came out in 2007. Response was kind of mixed to that one. A lot of people thought that it started very strong and then deteriorated into a mess. It should be noted that Danny Boyle was not the director for that film. So a lot of people were very eager to see Danny Boyle return to one of his most famous and well-loved works. 28 Years Later, unsurprisingly, picks up 28 years after the original outbreak of the rage virus. And it, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say, sort of skips over the events of 28 Weeks Later, and if not retcons it, just kind of explains it away with one sentence at the beginning of the film. In this particular iteration of the universe, the virus has been contained within Great Britain. The rest of the world has managed to beat back the virus and is kind of going on as normal. The United Kingdom has become this kind of self-contained quarantine zone where a bunch of primitive, isolated communities and civilizations have sprung up in the wake of the devastation. This movie opens with one community that occupies an island that is connected only by one narrow land bridge to the mainland. In this rather primitive scenario, we have a 12-year-old boy named Spike, who, as a rite of passage, is being taken by his father on his very first hunt. The whole point of this expedition is to prove that he can hold his own against the infected, and it means that he will have transitioned from being a young boy to a man. So the first part of the movie focuses very much on the relationship between this young boy and his father. However, very quickly, the movie takes a sharp left turn, and it then becomes more of like an escort mission as Spike takes his mother to find someone that he thinks can help them. His mother is very sick. He's worried that she's dying. And when he hears that there is someone who used to be a doctor living on the mainland, he is willing to risk it all to take his mother to get the help that she needs. When it transitions to this next chapter, the movie's tone definitely shifts. It ceases to be an action adventure type movie, and it becomes much more contemplative, and it starts to deal with loss. It also delves into the nature of empathy, how we hold on to our humanity when we're surrounded by nothing but brutality. It is posing a lot of really big questions. Not really what was advertised, not probably what people were expecting when they went to see this movie, and kind of a radical shift from the first chapter, which felt like it was going to be much more of a traditional action adventure coming of age type movie. I think the impact that marketing has on the reception for a movie really can't be underestimated. I've seen many movies that were perfectly fine on their own terms, but because of how they were marketed, it created a false set of expectations, and people went into the theater expecting one thing and got something else. And when that happens, people tend to get a little cranky. They feel like they've been the victim of a bait and switch. And so they end up sort of heaping abuse on a movie that doesn't necessarily deserve it. I can think of one example of a film called It Comes at Night. It is actually an extremely effective and well acted post apocalyptic drama. But because of how it was marketed, which was as a horror movie with monsters lurking in the background, the audience score just was in the absolute basement for that movie. 28 Years Later is not a traditional horror film. I found it much more of a meditation on mortality, the decisions that we have to make as we transition from a child into an adult. So let's get into some spoilers. Um, Most people have probably heard by now that the last 5 minutes of the movie are kind of over the top. They come out of nowhere, and it definitely becomes an exercise in camp. I don't have a problem with camp. I enjoy it. In fact, I enjoyed the last scene. I had a big smile on my face the whole time. But it felt out of nowhere. The characterization was extremely different from anything that had been happening. This movie had a very somber, elegiac tone, and then all of a sudden, you know, backflips. I thought maybe I'd disassociated and was suddenly watching A Clockwork Orange. It felt like an entirely different movie for the last few minutes. I realized this is probably to set up the sequel, which has already been filmed and I believe is coming out in January of 2026, which is going to be called Bone Temple. I think it really could have been done better. Even as small a change as perhaps having this be an end credit sequence. So giving people a moment to pause and catch their breath and say, hey, chapter break. This is the next step. I think it would have helped people be more prepared for it, and it probably would have made the scene go down better. On the whole, I would say that this movie was pretty good, but not great. Again, I went in with extremely high expectations, which might not be fair, but I mean, with Garland and Boyle on board, I couldn't help it. I got my hopes up that it was going to be a masterpiece, and I don't think it is, but it does have a lot of really interesting ideas. It has some very strong performances, particularly by the lead. I definitely think it's worth seeing. Just adjust your expectations and know that you are not going to see a rock'em sock'em horror movie. If I had to give this a score, I'd probably give it maybe a 3 out of 5. Like I said, I think it's a solid movie. It has some really good filmmaking on display at particular moments. I just don't think the whole thing hangs together as well as it should. And marketing departments need to get their act together because they're not doing the films they promote any favors. Thanks for listening, and maybe I'll catch you later.